Future Freight Festival in Chattanooga, Tennessee is the event of the fall. Subscribers to Check Call have a special discount code for F3 registration. This is going to be one of the best deals on F3 tickets. Use the code CheckCall F324 at checkout to take advantage of this offer. See you in Chattanooga. Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Don't forget to subscribe to Check Call, the newsletter on FreightWaves.com if you haven't already. Today we welcome back the one and only David Spencer, VP of Market Intelligence at Arrive Logistics. Welcome back to the show, David.
It's great to be back, Mary. Thanks so much for having me.
As we have come to expect, we have another market update this month. But I'm kind of, I'm excited. It seems, from my personal view, it seems that things are turning slightly more positive in the freight market. I'm not going to say that they're amazing, but they're not as depressing to look at. So I'll take a win where I can get it. But speaking of not depressing, what are some wins that you've seen these past few months to end Q3, if you will? What are some of those wins that you've seen in the market?
Yeah, well, win is really all a matter of perspective, right? I think, so I guess I'll speak to wins from all sides here. I think, first and foremost, from a shipper's point of view, I think that what's encouraging is that it still looks like there's some time left before we're going to experience a true market shift in the sense of rapidly increasing a rapid volatility that's sustained, where routing guide gets blown up. We've seen some pretty good tests of the market the last month or two. And as we kind of get on the back sides of those, yes, there's still some shakeup, but I think ultimately what we're seeing is that the market capacity is still able to absorb these disruptions today. And there's a little bit more time for you as a shipper. So I'd call that a win on the shipper side of things for sure. And as we start shifting focus to, the carrier side of the equation, I think, unfortunately at the expense of in the way of these storms, the victims here, there is some volatility we're seeing in the spot market, and there is some additional money to be made, helping with the relief efforts of these storms and in the aftermath here, abnormal or unusual demand surges that normally wouldn't be expected to be there, disruption from the ports. I know we're going to get into that later, most likely, but all these things are creating some opportunities at a time of year where you don't normally expect to see it. You come into early October and typically you see an early Q4 lull in that opportunity as a carrier. You're getting off that end of quarter push. You're not quite into that Q4 sense of urgency push quite yet. Imports are dying down typically. So to see that type of opportunity right now at this period in the quarter where you typically don't see it, that's a win as well. And I think, there's an opportunity where some of this money could keep some capacity in the market or some brokers in the market longer, then it could slow down exits, right? And that could be what we see from this.
I think that there were some people a couple months ago that were talking on LinkedIn about how we need a huge natural disaster to impact the freight market. And I think you and I had talked about it a little bit, and we were like, yeah, but who wants to be the guy you rooting for a natural disaster? But we got it. We sure did. I just don't think it's having quite the impact on the freight market everybody thought. But yeah, I do see a lot of constraints kind of happening as, roads get back opened in Western North Carolina. And, obviously those recovery efforts get underway and really moving down in Florida now that they can go a week without another hurricane, because that was a lot at one time.
Yeah, the back-to-back nature, I think, made it worse. That Tampa area, especially just south of Tampa there, that stretch of the western shore of Florida certainly got, hit twice, smacked twice there pretty good. So, Western North Carolina, obviously some significant catastrophic damage. Nothing in terms of impact to the freight market in terms of activity in that region. But, certainly not being, a Houston, for example, or really the damage we could have seen in Atlanta, the impact has been muted to the overall market as a whole.
Yeah, which is honestly probably the best case scenario, is that it's just kind of more regionally or individual market affected. Um, Not quite the way to end the positives of the last couple months, but we it's a nice segue into those lows that we've had. So we touched on the two casual hurricanes we had like a week apart from each other, really just success after success there. And then we had the cute little port strike that lasted for a couple days and had everyone panic buying toilet paper. Which, fun fact, David Spencer, I don't know if you know this, like 90% of our toilet paper is made in the US. There's a giant plant like an hour and a half away from me. So that was like a fun moment for me of like, hey guys, you don't need to go panic buy toilet paper.
People are still scarred from running out during COVID.
Yeah, yeah. There's I think the post-pandemic consumer panic buying choices are interesting to say the least, you know. So how the kind of question that everyone's wondering is how long is it going to take everything to recover, for the inventory to get kind of balanced out, for those ships that were waiting for berth or waiting to get unloaded, how long for those to kind of get back on schedule. I mean, obviously, the damage in Western North Carolina, I've seen reports that some of those major interstates won't even be open for the next year or two in some areas. So, obviously, those like trucks are going to be rerouted across that. But short, like not quite 2 years out, unless your prediction is 2 years for a market recovery in that area. Do you kind of see it taking a while to get the backlog of the East Coast ports plus the hurricane damage kind of all evened out?
Yeah, I think we're still sorting through it, and we're still seeing a lot of activity inbound into the southeast. Into Florida right now, into Georgia, into North Carolina and South Carolina. We're still seeing a lot of increased activity. Capacity into those regions. It's that the costs are definitely elevated. On a similar aspect, outbound Florida, right? You're ending up with a lot of empty trucks down there in Florida. So outbound Florida, it's actually cheaper coming out of there right now than it was because trucks are looking for loads and freight out of there, so they don't have to deadhead. Um, we're still seeing that trend, right? So that's a good indicator that we're still seeing some impact. I think what is encouraging, from a shipper's perspective, is that it's not necessarily a nationwide impact. I know when Hurricane Harvey hit, yes, there was a lot of other factors at play. Manufacturing was at an elevated level compared to where it is today. Yes, we were on the verge of ELD mandate, but I think the location of that disruption and the significance of it, from a freight perspective, it was more impactful. It drew more capacity in and more capacity from around the country, and we're not seeing that today. And so, while we certainly are expecting to continue to see some regionalized impacts in the near term from these hurricanes, it's our view that the market's going to absorb these, and then the normal seasonality is going to return to being the main market narrative here as we progress through the year and into the first quarter. That being said, the port strike is kind of a different scenario. I feel like we just kind of hit the snooze button on that particular disruption, and we're still seeing shippers put those contingency plans in place, looking at that elevated preference for imports going to the West Coast to avoid these potential scenarios of a shutdown in January. Assuming that these negotiations are nowhere near finished at this point, and there's certainly an elevated risk of us having the same kind of conversations we did just a few weeks ago. As we get into the middle part of January around these port strikes.
Yeah, I would like the port strikes to not be like a round two happening in January. I think all of us would like that, but unfortunately, we don't have control over that. I do like that the kind of we I know we talked about consumers in the post pandemic and how they like to panic buy specific things, but I do like the kind of resiliency it has built into shippers and other things, because contrary to what a lot of people were saying, the port strike literally didn't just like wake up one day and they were like, we're gonna strike now. They kind of let everyone know about it ahead of time, gave shippers opportunities, stayed open on the weekends, certain ports did, to help get the temperature sensitive goods out and other prioritized freight out. And so it was kind of like a, we're working with you, but they also let people know with plenty of notice so that way they could, put those contingency plans in place, such as, maybe smaller ports that aren't under a union on the East Coast or Canada, or shipping things to the West Coast. I like that that has that kind of made shippers almost like flex that resiliency, or that kind of that ability to, what is the word I'm looking for, when you can just kind of like shift on a dime.
Flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like really flexing that flexibility muscle for a shipper, as like a nice reminder of like, hey, we can do this, but on like a not as massive scale as we saw in like 2021, because that was insane.
Yeah, it was certainly seen in increased level of sophistication in shippers, the way they handle disruptions, their connectivity with their partners. The last few years have really been it's changed the game from a shipper perspective in terms of what their capabilities are, and that applies to both domestic truckload freight and as well as global global trade, ocean shipping, etc. And yeah, I guess one other word for that could be like agility. I was like, what? I guess flexibility, agility, ability to adapt, adaptability is improved from a shipper point of view. And ocean shipping has challenges because it takes time for these goods to move. You really have to plan ahead and knowing what's coming. We're seeing that, but hopefully the January date being a point in time in the year where there's a lot less urgency typically for these imports coming in. Um, Hopefully that helps limit some of the disruptions we see if and should a strike occur again in January.
Yeah, I would just like there to not be another strike in January, if I can be so bold as to make a request for myself. But so we've kind of hit on some highs and lows. And before we get into some of our predictions for what's to come for the rest of the year, there is something that I think might actually kind of, I don't want to say disrupt the market, but definitely it's going to come, and I think it's going to remove some of that capacity from the market. And that is the new drug and alcohol clearinghouse rule, which, for those who may not know, I'm going to double check my notes so I don't make anything wrong, so I don't say anything wrong here. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has officially published a rule that basically says if you have on your license, if you have failed a drug or alcohol test, you get your license downgraded and removed. You have to go through the return to duty process before you can be put back on work again. Do you think that this is going to cause a lot of capacity to leave the market?
It's a difficult question to really approximate exactly how impactful it will be. These prohibited drivers, one of the numbers I saw was about somewhere between 175 to 180,000 drivers currently in this status, and what percentage of them are actually currently employed and driving is really hard to quantify. Carriers haven't been forced to be compliant to this point, but many of them are already proactively taking those steps and those precautions. Many of them being very safety focused, want to avoid the potential risks, with hiring and employing these drivers. So there's a great a probability that the vast majority of these drivers are not currently on the road, but getting an exact number is pretty difficult. I think I've seen some research on this and some anecdotal estimates that the number could be in the tens of thousands of drivers that get removed overnight, so to speak, from the market in mid-November. As a result of this, I think the timing is interesting. It's in the lead up to when we typically see Q4 peak season start to kick off right around Thanksgiving and the week leading up. And it'll be interesting to see if that does have an impact and how much capacity really is pulled out of the market. We're just trying to talk to our carriers to get a feel for it. For the most part, we're finding the carriers we work with don't employ these drivers. So, we're not saying it's going to be nothing, but we're hopeful that this ends up having a pretty limited shock to the system.
Yeah, well, I've I was doing some research for it for another article, and it's like you said, it's really hard to get a concrete number. Just because they have a prohibited status on their license doesn't necessarily mean that they are still on the road driving. And it could be that they're in the middle of the return to duty process, which you have to go through like a substance alcohol test, you have to do like a education plan, and then you have to pass your return to duty test, and then for the following 6 to 12 months, or no, for the following 12 months, you have to pass six unannounced, like basically drug tests. So it's definitely a long process, but obviously, if you are a carrier who prides themselves on safety and having the top of the top, it's something that you're not really necessarily concerning yourself with, because obviously you're not going to employ those drivers, you're not going to have those drivers on payroll, whereas some of those carriers that are just they'll take anyone off the street. We know who they are. If they'll take anyone off the street, it might be a bigger factor for them. So I could see this potentially affecting some of the brokerages that have maybe some of those looser carrier restrictions, or don't necessarily have strong, reliable carrier partnerships like fully built up yet. I could see it maybe impacting their ability to service their customers. However, I think from a shipper side, I don't think they'll kind of notice much or have much. Or kind of have that much of an impact. But who knows? I might be wrong. I might be wrong. Could be a whole bunch of people out there with it.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it's like I said, the timing is really interesting. Where you could see a period of year where we already see some capacity shortages become exacerbated by this rule change. So, um, we're going to be ready to make a shift in case. But like I said, I think hopefully the market's able to absorb this pretty quickly from a shipper point of view as well.
I like to think so. I like to think we're all poised for it, because we do still have a little bit of extra capacity floating around. So, yeah, here's hoping that it doesn't. Here's hoping that all 100,000 drivers don't magically disappear overnight, because that would probably suck a lot. Um, but anyway, so you've mentioned it a few times. We are coming up on retail peak season. And last year, I believe we weren't calling it weak season, but we were definitely saying keep an eye on it. It wasn't going to be as popular, but don't let it sneak up on you. So this year, is it weak season? Is it keep your eye on it? Or is it we're back, baby?
I think I'm going to give two answers for two different modes here. I think I'll start with refrigerated temp control freight. We're seeing a lot of data pointing to temp control equipment being a little bit more sensitive to demand surges and disruptions in the market. And so tender rejections, I think, have been hovering at like 13, 14% the last couple weeks. And that trend isn't just a hurricane relief thing. We've been seeing that increasing trend on a year over year basis, and we're now into a period of year where temp control really ramps up here, food season, so to speak, and cold weather season. So I am really cautioning many people out there who rely on temp control capacity to be prepared for some challenges as we get into mid-November, really through whenever we're seeing some severe widespread cold weather or winter weather throughout the month of January as well. So I think November to January temp control definitely could see some fireworks as it relates to rate volatility, especially in the week of Thanksgiving, the week of Christmas. Watch out for that. I'm definitely ringing the alarm bells of what we're seeing in the data on that side of things. That being said, as we get back into the Q1 slowdown, I wouldn't be surprised to see, what we saw this year. And all of that volatility just fade right back into stability. So definitely a seasonality component there, but I do think we see refrigerator or temp control equipment get exposed here, particularly in those few weeks, or if we see that widespread weather.
I was just gonna say, I feel like just in the last month or so, refrigerated volumes and rejections have just been atypically high. And everyone just like turned around and is like, what is happening with reefer? And I'm like, it's time, it's time for it to get a little hot and pop and hot and popping. But yeah, it's just kind of took everyone off guard. And I kind of love that for reefer, but I also don't love that because it's kind of atypical.
Yeah, I think we would expect it a little bit later in the quarter, but we're seeing it today. I think the hurricane relief is part of that. Why we're seeing that today. It's also you see that more northern harvest season and produce, right? Starting to it's weird. We're talking about produce in October, but that stuff that really comes late in the year that's going on some of this equipment. Midwest, the northern Midwest, up, in the Northeast, we're seeing some of those areas pick up for sure. And yeah, I mean, thinking about the van side of the equation, I really think that it's going to be a normal seasonal type of trend here, a bit muted peak season for most of the country. That being said, we're still watching kind of that impact of the disruption in the southeast from the storms play out. I think it's yet to be determined how long we're going to continue to see that inbound southeast disruption really kind of make that lane show some volatility. But other than that, I think we're going to see a relatively normal or muted peak season. You saw a lot of shippers pull forward those imports. They got a lot of retailers have these goods in their possession already. A lot of that is already inventory is already in the regional hubs or distribution centers, and as a result of that, we're going to see, I think, a more normalized or muted demand as it relates to retail peak season, and less of that urgent. It needs to get from the port to Chicago, yesterday type of stuff as we get into that crunch time.
I mean, as someone who used to despise peak retail peak season, I do wish that I was working it right now because it would be so much more relaxed and like not necessarily. I don't know if relax is the right term, but it would be less anxiety inducing. It would be a little more manageable, I think, instead of just like it doesn't matter as long as you have a truck, just pick it up and get it there. I mean, there will always be those calls, but they're I feel like they're just much less urgent right now. Um, but you know what is urgent, David, is we're coming up to the end of our time, and I do have to thank you for being a impeccable sport about all of the unhinged questions that we ask you. And you would think that by now maybe I would just stop, but that's not the case today. So today, our final question for you is if you could replace your hands with anything besides hands, what would you choose?
Oh boy. Um, Mary, these questions get more and more thought provoking for sure. To be fair, I have had a day or two to think about this. And I've asked a lot of people, and I think I mentioned this to you, but I don't think I got one answer that I was like, hey, yeah, that's a great answer. Maybe one or two, but I'm trying to think, what would be useful, and you hear things like hooks or claws or tongs or whatever. But I think what came to mind was like chopsticks. I chopsticks would be great. I we went to Japan, and we spent a couple weeks there, and by the end I was like, man, I could do anything with chopsticks. You're kind of forced into it. And I guess good memories associated with it, and not afraid of having to do a thing or two with the chopsticks. So I'm gonna go with that as my answer.
So would it be like one stick per hand, or would each hand be a pair of chopsticks?
It would, yeah, that's the difficult thing. I'd assume there'd be some, like, it would be a pair of chopsticks in each hand.
Because I feel like if you had to turn both hands into chopstick, it would make it much harder to pick
It
things
wouldn't
up.
work. It would not work. No, no. And somehow I'd have something controlling it, like a hand. but maybe it'd be chopsticks would be permanently attached to my hand, and that's all I could ever use. Something like that.
There you go. I like it. I like it. All right. So if anyone has chopstick questions, or if they want to borrow your crystal ball to look into the future, where can they find you outside the show?
Yeah, first and foremost, come to arrivelogistics.com and navigate to our insights page. We have newly published content with our rate forecast through 2025 for the year ahead that we're really excited to share. I think, nothing too, I'd say controversial in that forecast, but certainly a bunch of research behind why we think we're going to see what we put in there as we get through the course of next year. Arrivelogistics.com, you can find our content there, as well as contact myself. But I'm additionally pretty active on LinkedIn and on a pretty regular basis here on the Check Call podcast with Mary O'Connell.
I'm excited. Our next episode with David Spencer is going to be recapping our 2024 market predictions and seeing how they played out, and then also making some unhinged guesses for 2025. So that will be in December. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us, David.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.